This is an education spotlight, which is education, as you know, has transformed recently during the COVID times, and we are focusing on this aspect. And today's education spotlight is on the power of experiments in the next normal. Now, we have some great stalwarts at this session. Let me introduce them to you. Our spotlight speaker, one of our spotlight speakers is Professor Dr. Sugata Mitra, who is the Professor Emeritus, NIT University. He is the former Professor of Educational Technology, Newcastle University. He is also the former visiting Professor of MIT Media Lab, winner of the Deva Mehta Prize for Innovation in IT 2003, winner of the first ever USD 1 million TED Prize in 2013. Professor Dr. Sugata Mitra's work on children's education include the hole in the wall experiment, where children across the internet in unsupervised groups, the idea of self-organized learning environments in schools, the role of experienced educators over the internet in a granny cloud, and the school in the cloud where children take charge of the learning anywhere. His interests include children's education, remote presence, self-organizing systems, cognitive systems, complex dynamical systems, physics, and consciousness. We warmly welcome you, Professor Dr. Sugata Mitra, sir. Let me introduce you to the next spotlight speaker, who is Dr. Pradeep K. Khosla. He is the Chancellor of University of California, San Diego. Dr. Pradeep K. Khosla is an internationally renowned electrical and computer engineer, recognized for his seminal contributions in secure software, intelligent robot systems, and designs. As UC San Diego's Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Khosla provides vision and strategy, leading a campus of more than 39,000 students within 7 undergraduate colleges and 12 academic divisions and graduate schools, a preeminent health system, and the prestigious Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Now, Dr. Khosla has positioned UC San Diego to define the future of the public research university by activating the institution's first ever strategic plan and launching the campaign for UC San Diego, an ambitious 10-year, $2 billion endeavor aimed at transforming the university physically, intellectually, and culturally. Excuse me. You will be happy to know that USD 2.31 billion has already been raised in 8 years. Under Chancellor Khosla's leadership, UC San Diego has expanded college access and affordability for undeserved students, initiated campus-wide interdisciplinary research initiatives to foster collaboration and solve societal challenges, and strengthened university and community partnerships to drive regional impact. We warmly welcome you, Dr. Pradeep K. Khosla, sir. And this spotlight session will be hosted by Dr. Suborno Bose, who is the founder of EduGuy and founder and chief mentor in the Smart Group, a chartered accountant with over 30 years of entrepreneurial experience in India and abroad, and the founder and chief mentor of the IndySmart Group, which consists of International Institute of Hotel Management, which is today regarded as one of the key leaders in the field of international hospitality management education in India. Dr. Suborno Bose is inarguably the country's best known hospitality educator, with the presence of his institute's major brands like IHM and IAM hotel schools at Kolkata, Delhi, Goa, Bangkok, Bangalore, Ahmedabad, Jaipur, Hyderabad, Pune, Uzbekistan, Doha, and London, UK. Dr. Bose has been conferred the honorary doctorate of business administration by the Edinburgh Napier University, UK, and the honorary award of doctorate of science by the University of West London, UK. Dr. Bose has pioneered in organizing the Young Chef Olympiad in 2015, and it had a great success in 2019 too, with over 55 countries participating in what has been billed as the world's biggest young chef competition in the history. Dr. Bose's newest initiative is the EduGuy Career Predictive Test, the world's most technologically advanced career test powered by IBM's AI and deep learning technologies. Now, we are very privileged to have these stalwarts at the session. Now, we warmly welcome you, sir, Dr. Suborno Bose, sir, and I now hand over the session to you. Ladies and gentlemen, the spotlight session, Power of Experiments in the Next Normal. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Raki, and a very good evening to all the viewers in India, and a very warm welcome to Professor Sugata Mitra and Professor Pradeep Khosla. It's such a great moment to have two of the stalwarts in education among us in this INFOCOM 2020, the first ever virtual INFOCOM. And we are very fortunate that we have got people like you coming from all the way from USA, UK, and all over the world. Well, this time the theme of the INFOCOM is the discover the new frontiers of education in the next normal. And we are going to talk on the power of experiment in the next normal. And let me start with telling that the education is one of the area which has been impacted very much in the COVID-19 situation. Of course, there are other areas which has been impacted, but I think it's education that has taken a long time to come to our new normal thing. So if I have to start it by telling that a quote from the Alice in Wonderland, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same pace. But if you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as you can. So I think in this time when we are learning, as we are teaching, we are doing the online classes, the virtual seminars, the virtual assessments, a lot of things happening which has never happened before. A lot of things which were unthinkable is now been done with ease. And I think technology has been one of our biggest friend, because it's only possible because we had the advantage of technology with us. So in a way, it's like we are flying a plane and while making a plane at the same time. The system's going on, and I think it's a new system. Everybody's learning. The teachers, the educators, the leaders in the education industry, the administrator, and of course the students and the stakeholders like the teachers. I think everyone is learning, and it is such a learning process that it's all fun as well. A lot of new things are coming in the new normal. And we have with us two of the very eminent person to talk about this learning sense. And what I feel is that it is we are in a process of innovating while in constant motion, prototyping, testing, and refining new pedagogies, technologies, and pastoral models with students in real time. Now, this has never happened before. We cannot stop the online classes. So real thing is happening as we are innovating day in and day out, as we are trying to experiment with the new ideas, with the new concepts and the new guidelines. And that is making all the difference, because we have to understand in a lot of countries like India, the online learning and teaching never existed the way it is done now. And our teachers and our professors never really taught online the way they are doing now. So there is a big gap of the delivery in the assessment and of course in the entire ecosystem of the online learning and education. So there we are going to ask, first of all, I'll ask Professor Mitra. Professor Mitra, it's such a pleasure to have you with us this evening, and thank you so very much for joining us in INFOCOM 2020. And I'd like to ask you to give your perspective about
Well,
this.
the audio, we are just adjusting the audio a bit. I think the audio is not.
Is audio not audible?
No, I can hear quite clearly.
Yeah. Sorry about that. So once again, I'll come to Professor Mitra first. And Professor Mitra, it's such a pleasure to have you. Someone like you, we are so proud of you, and for your work in the Hole in the Wall and all that great work you have done for education. So may I now request you to come and put in your perspective as we take the entire education ecosystem into the next normal. Professor Mitra.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. The last time I spoke at INFOCOM was, I think, about a year or maybe 2 years ago. And as you mentioned, Dr. Bose, it was an entirely different world. I mean, I was standing in front of an audience of many, many people. And I mean, the way it used to be. And then here we are. So what is it that one should do? Well, I thought I would take this opportunity to present to you a certain point of view, which is perhaps not entirely obvious to everyone. And it's not every day that I can have the chancellor of a university sitting right here. So, I will wish to take that opportunity and to present what I think might be worth considering. I will not talk about all those experiments of 20 years. That bit is known to many people. And anyway, what it showed was actually very simple. 20 years of work can be made into a single sentence. Do not teach learners what they can learn by themselves. Now, nothing can be more obvious than that. I mean, if a learner can learn something by themselves, then let them get on with it. Don't teach them. That it took many experiments to show that that is the case. I mean, can children learn by themselves? How much can they learn? What's the effect of the internet? But those questions have been answered. What we need to look at today is something a little bit different. Not the easiest thing to do, but here, let me try. We, the people who are listening to all of this, we are all educated. And all of us have a certain definition of that process in our minds. It means all of us went to school, means all of us went to universities, maybe we did all kinds of skill-oriented courses, et cetera, et cetera. That's education. We are all educated. There is another kind of system. And those people who come out of that system are not here, and they will not be here. That lot of people are called street smart. Every city, every nation has them. We may want to pretend that they don't exist, but we all know that they do. What is street smart? It's a person who probably hasn't gone through the education system at all, or gone through it very, very partially, or gone through an education system that was so completely irrelevant that they dropped out or forgot everything that they had ever done. So then they popped out into life. And what did they do? They picked up things from the street. They taught themselves all sorts of things. And then they became something. Maybe they became a plumber, they became a carpenter, or they became an electrician, and so on. Governments in the developed countries kind of woke up and said, okay, but you can't just do this. You have to have a certificate of being able to practice these things. And they've found ways to get that certificate. In the developing countries, no such certificates exist. Or if they exist, they're not used. So nobody cares. But my question is that a street smart electrician can rewire the electrical wiring in your entire home and do a perfectly good job, and you would pay them for it. I'm speaking to you now from Calcutta in India. Everybody uses street smart people to get everything done, everything. To fix your house wiring, you don't call an electrical engineer, for heaven's sake. Nowhere in the world would you do that. So what I'm saying is that the street smart system is an alternative education that has been with us for a long, long time, unrecognized. The introduction of the internet for the last about 20 years or so has completely changed the power of the street smart educated person. Suddenly, what they don't know, they can know in seconds. Earlier on, you could have talked to a person like that and a street smart guy and say, oh, you're nice, but if you had gone to college, if you had gone to university, just imagine how much better you would be. How will you know what the new developments are? But you can't ask that now because the guy will just pull out his phone and say, don't worry, madam, it won't take too long. So what I am trying to propose, and I'll simply propose it, I'll leave it at that basically, is to say, maybe it is time to integrate the street smart education system with the regular one. Maybe it is time where the regular education system used some of the methods that the street smart people use. And maybe it is time for the street smart people to realize that education doesn't mean going to an expensive university. Education means having an internet connection. That's all. So I didn't want to put too many ideas on the table. I thought I would leave it at this to say that the COVID pandemic has made it possible for us to think of an alternative system of education, not just for the so-called educated, but for that lot of people who had an education that to us was not imaginable. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Professor Mitra, and that was quite interesting. Street smart educator. We have heard about the term street smart from the childhood, and obviously in a lot of places we have seen that the street smart people have actually succeeded much more than so-called academically brilliant students, and we have got many examples of it. But then to really add on the power of internet, and you are street smart, what a perfect recipe to become a successful person in today's world. I come to Professor Khosla. Professor Khosla, once again, very warm welcome to INFOCOM 2020 in the Education Spotlight session in the day one, when we are discussing the power of experiment in the next normal. And we are absolutely delighted to have you with us in this evening. And we want to hear from you, Professor Khosla, about your perspective on the new normal education and how the entire ecosystem is getting impacted and what the future looks like.
Thank you, Dr. Bose. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good to see you on the screen, and Dr. Mitra, thank you for your thoughts. Uh, so as the chancellor of a large public university, I am focused not just on managing a large $6 billion infrastructure, but also trying to manage the delivery of education and make sure that our students are educated properly. So what is it that I've learned in this pandemic? The first thing I've learned is that people assume that going to a four-year university is primarily about content acquisition. And that is true, but it is true in a very limited sense. Four-year education in the residential context has social development, has intellectual development, has physical development, all of this that you go through without understanding and appreciating in the context of living. We did that in the context of living in a hostel in IIT, and a lot of institutions that in the US and the rest of the world do that in the context of living in a campus. But even when you don't live on a campus, if you look at four-year education now, in the 60s and 70s, it evolved from a single person doing content acquisition to project-based learning, to experimentation, to learning in groups, to working on research programs or research projects while you're an undergrad. And I think what COVID has done is all of these things that we took for granted as being happening in person, it has challenged it completely. So for example, one of the big challenges we faced is we had a lab in biology, understanding the genetics, like how do you hack biology? It was a biology hacking lab. It was a physical lab using physical facilities, physical experimentation. Suddenly, nobody's allowed to be in touch with each other. Nobody's allowed to be in physical proximity of each other. Then the question is, how do you run a lab like this? So this actually takes me to an experiment like many years ago in '94, when I spent 3 years at DARPA, which is Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. The web browser was literally just announced. Mosaic had announced it was not the browser that you're seeing right now. And the question was, how does internet change or the way we integrate, the way we collaborate, the way we work with each other? So at that point, as a program manager, I defined an experiment, which was the following, that we're going to design a multidisciplinary missile seeker head, like an assembly which has got electronics, mechanical parts, electrical parts, and we're going to design it using distributed teams across the US without ever spending a penny on traveling. You cannot travel by car, you cannot travel by the airplane. The only place you can travel is through the internet and collaborate. Now remember, this is long before Zoom. This is Mosaic had just been announced. And what we were able to show is that one can actually do this very effectively when people start changing their expectations, their behavior, and the way they interact with people. So I think that's what's going to happen to education, the way education is delivered. We at UC San Diego are trying to understand, like, how do I give you a social experience that you get when you're on campus by being involved in multiple student organizations. Now, typically you would not think of this as a problem in education, but this is a big problem because this issue has become very significant because that social experience has a lot of educational value. Sure. And I don't know this for sure, but I'm going to hypothesize that those are the types of experiences that lead to what Professor Mitra was talking about in terms of being street smart. Interacting with people teaches you how to read people, teaches you how to interact with people, gives you these quote unquote soft skills, which are basically street smart skills, and then expands your horizon and rounds off your education. So let me just say, we are trying to figure out how to bring street smart soft skills into a Zoom world, which is going to coexist with a physical world going forward. So,
thanks, Professor Khosla. That was interesting. You spoke about a social experience and how we can get the street smart kids of today Zoom smart, and that can possibly be the ideal recipe coming up. And let me also speak a little about the teachers, because we all are into education. We are major stakeholders into education. And the current COVID-19 scenario, I think, is offering great opportunities for the teachers to realize that their power to act and innovate. Well, transformational professional learning happens not only when we enjoy ourselves, but I think it happens more intensely when we are deeply uncomfortable. And it is history. I think it's very important that the flipping learning, the blended learning, which are now the new next normal, and we are already experiencing things like that. because Professor Khosla talked about the social experience as well, and the Zoom experience can really integrate. So coming to that, I'll come to Professor Mitra, who I think long before Zoom or video platform came, I think you started this hole in the world, and you worked in uh, areas like Sundarbans and with the disadvantaged people, and you saw the vision that education is possible remotely on a different angle by innovation and by possibly making the teachers more innovating and powerful. If you can come, sir, and share some of your experience on that and how it really transforms to today's reality as well.
Certainly. You know, those results back in 1999, 2000 were very simple. It simply said that groups of unsupervised children using the internet can learn almost anything by themselves if they wish to. What does that mean? It means that if you have a good internet connection, a reasonably good internet connection in a safe public space. I used to stick those computers into walls in those days. And then if you ask children a question which interests them, then they can invariably find the answer. And I was able to show that they can also understand what they have found. So obviously this raised a very important question. Are you trying to say that teachers are not required? And for decades, this question has been chasing me, saying, oh, you're trying to say that teachers are not required, which, by the way, is absolutely not what I'm trying to say. All that I'm trying to say is that do not teach a learner what the learner can learn by themselves. That's all. That's all I'm trying to say. So teach them what they cannot learn by themselves. So in the system that is now called self-organized learning environments, SOLE, S-O-L-E, the idea is that you take a group of children, you give them very few computers, just one or two, because otherwise they won't form groups, and forming groups is very important. And then you ask them a question, and you might say, well, where does the teacher come into the picture? But who makes the question? If you leave the children to simply work out the questions for themselves, then they will make a very limited set of questions. The teacher's job is to convert the curriculum into a whole set of interesting questions, questions that will grab the attention of the children. And they don't have to be complicated questions. They can be simple questions. For example, take biology or physiology. In a class in England, a class full of 9-year-olds, I once had made a question. I said, what will happen if you don't cut your nails? So all the children said, oh, the nails will grow. And I said, well, and how long will they grow? So they said, they will grow very long. So I said, how long? Will they grow so big that they'll go out of the window? And then the children said, no, not that long. They'll grow very long, but not that long. So I said, that's very strange. So I have a question. Why do nails keep growing for some time? And then why do they stop growing? And the children said, well, what's the answer? And I said, quite honestly, I don't know. I don't know the answer. And then what followed was a pretty complex lesson on physiology, which the children taught themselves off the internet. It involved evolution, it involves adaptation, it involved survival. The teacher and I just stood there with our mouths open, observing this self-organized learning. This is the world we are in. And in this world, COVID can do nothing to that system. It's a question of setting it up correctly. So I'll leave it at that, with a long answer to your short question, that groups of learners can learn of the internet by themselves if they have a good enough reason. The teacher is the person who gives them that good enough reason.
Thanks very much. That was very innovative answer. Very innovative learning strategy. Actually, moving out of that more than the teaching strategy, where the teacher and the pupil learn together as a nucleus of the learning strategy. Coming to Professor Khosla, of course, you had a huge experience in education, in computing, and of course, in the overall grooming and educational system over the years. So what's your take on this? How empowered your teachers are, our teachers are, and when I'm saying our teachers, I'm also talking about Indian perspective as well, and how we can really motivate them to innovate and come through more of a learning strategy, as Professor Mitra said.
So I think we need to go back and analyze what Professor Mitra said. He said students can learn on their own if they're asked the right question and if they are motivated. And I think the second part, one cannot discount the importance of the second part because it's not obvious to know what it means to be motivated. When you are sitting in a classroom with other students and you're supposed to be at school between like 9 a.m. and 4 p.m., you are forced in a certain mode of action. So you're forced to be motivated by the people around you. But in a Zoom world, if you are not doing that, and if you're sitting at home where I could turn the camera off and listen to you and you have no idea whether I'm listening to you or not, whether I can go to sleep and you still don't know what I'm doing out here, where I have to deal with the daily grind of life, dealing with parents, dealing with siblings, dealing with socioeconomic circumstances, it's very hard to keep that motivation up. So in my mind, what Professor Mitra is saying makes sense, but in a Zoom world where we are connected only through Zoom windows and not physical connections, and therefore not physical oversight, and therefore not constraints on how we interact with each other, we have to understand how do we create this forcing function called motivation. Because once we can create that forcing function, that force field, then I can see what Professor Mitra says makes complete sense to me, because people will learn. People are curious by nature, right? That is the whole history of humanity. I mean, we would not invent tools if we were not curious by nature. Problem solving, curiosity, project-based learning, that's what we are all about. But my concern mainly is creating that force field called motivation and focus in a Zoom world where there is no physical touch, no physical forcing function.
Absolutely, I fully agree with you as well. And just taking that question to Professor Mitra, you have worked with many kids in all over the world and many pupils, students, and it is actually a big concern. We are seeing among the students sitting in a chair in front of a computer and on a screen from 9 in the morning till 6 in the evening, and that's the world day in, day out. No social experience, as Professor Khosla said in his initial words, and there is a very huge kind of disinterest. It is not getting inspiring anymore, however inspirational that teachers are. And of course, we all understand the reason that people are unwilling to go out. But in the next normal, as Professor Khosla said, the a street smart Zoom student, if I can make it into one quote, uh, what are you looking at? Are we producing the students who are going to be only the Zoom learners, or Zoom educated with no social skills, or in subjects where you need to really go in practical? Like I'm in hospitality, but we need to teach the student the social skills more than anything else. We need to teach them culinary skills, or somebody in design, fine arts. So what do you think about it, Professor Mitra, with your huge experience?
Well, firstly, I have to tell you that I agree entirely problem. I've seen it across the continents. And you know, what is interesting is that it is even more intense in the developed economies, this whole thing about disengagement.
Mm-hmm.
Teacher after teacher will tell me, yes, yes, Professor Mitra, we agree with you that, yes, if they are engaged, then they can do miracles by themselves. But the problem is, how do you get them engaged? So I started looking at students everywhere, all over the world. And I found a couple of important, interesting things. First of all, if the students are relatively poor, they are willing to work a little bit harder. I know it's a sweeping kind of generalization to make, and you could say, well, not under every circumstance and so on and so forth. But in general, I think for people in India, they will immediately understand that when the mother says, look, if you pay attention and if you do well, we will live a little bit better. That's a powerful impetus. In the United States, when the immigrant mother says to her child, if you work hard and if you do well, then we will do very well in this new country. And what's the result? In every exam, you find that it's the immigrant children who are topping the list everywhere. Are they really much cleverer than the local? Of course not. Of course not. It's just that they are more motivated. They are motivated by a motivator that is so powerful that it drags them to the top. Unlike the local guy who says, well, I mean, what's going to happen if I don't? What's going to happen if I just drop out of school? I'm going to drop out of school and I am going to become a musician. Well, you know that 1 in a million will succeed. But you know, everybody who does that doesn't believe in that. So this whole issue of engagement depends on, first of all, the social milieu that the student is in. We need to play with that. You cannot, as a teacher, say that I will enforce engagement. Of course you can't. You're helpless. You're powerless to do that. But if the parental influence, and most importantly, if the peer influence says that it is important to engage, you will get engagement. So just a few words on this peer bit and I'll stop. If you can get the children to agree, if they're children, I'm talking about children, if you can get the children to agree that they should give it a good shot, then you have a terrific chance that you'll get engagement. How do you get that? Well, in my case, I used to use all sorts of fair and unfair methods. One most powerful method was to say that I didn't know the answer. To 9-year-olds, this is amazing. They'll say, you know, Sugata, they call me Sugata. You know, Sugata is a professor. He doesn't know the answer. He said, well, I think it's really simple. I think we can tell him. And then they would go for it. Okay, so that was one way. The other way was to say that there is a reward at the end. Well, that's the easy way. That's the old way, you know. You do well and I'll give you this. That's what works with the street smart guys. If you tell them that they'll get a certificate at the end of it, and that certificate will enable them to increase their rates, oh, you'll get 120% engagement because of the reward. So reward, societal milieu, peer pressure are the 3 factors that I think eventually grabs attention. And of course, at the bottom of it all is the curiosity of being able to answer a question. That's the teacher's art. If you can make the question such that you cannot forget that question, that you think about that question even at night, then all the rest of what I was saying isn't important. You'll get engagement. It's happened to me once, just one quick example, and I'll stop. I was introducing the idea of fractals to 10-year-olds in a lower middle class locality in England, northeastern England. And the teacher said, "What for?" And I said, "I just want to see, will it work?" And I told the children, there's something called fractals and they're very beautiful, but that's all I know about them. And then 15, 20 minutes later, with the internet, obviously, Sugata, the flowers are fractals. The clouds are fractals. The trees are fractals. They're self-replicating patterns. And I said, "Oh my God, what's this?" And then the next day, a parent called in and said, "What's going on in school?" She asked the principal, and the principal said, "Why?" "My child was sitting at the breakfast table. I had given him pineapple to eat. And instead of eating it, he was staring at the skin of the pineapple and saying, 'Mom, that's a fractal.'" So there are different ways. Adolescents are different, children are different, and people who are looking for a job are different, and you need different methods to engage them.
Yes, absolutely agree. Professor Khosla, coming to you on the same subject, engagement. Yes. And again, we're talking about the social skill. We're talking about the university life, the school life, the life in the libraries and the canteens, and that kind of learning from each other, the peer learning. In your definition of Zoom educated, street smart student of today, this entire area would be over. They will be off. So how do we kind of create that kind of engagement in place of this, which they will be missing out terribly from their life?
Right, and that was my comment earlier when I started, that one cannot underestimate the educational power of that other mode of interaction, which is not in the classroom, which is not motivated by a teacher, which is self-motivated, trying to understand people, work with people. And we have to now, as educators, as human beings, run experiments to understand, how do I create that interaction in a Zoom world? Whereas we as human beings, from the day we are born, are used to physical interaction. I mean, there are very strong studies, well known, that if a little child the mother doesn't touch the child versus the mother touches the child, the development stages are very different. Physical touching is really important in the human developmental phase. So I can see that happening at the family level. But I can tell you the same happens when you grow up. Physical interactions are really important. So here in a Zoom world, how do I, as a human being now, as an educator, create that notion of physical interaction in the Zoom world? And I think what we are seeing right now is a flat 2D world, which is the beginning of Zoom. We are going to go into 3D very soon with 3D displays. We're going to go into virtual reality, augmented reality. All of that is going to become part of, and we are going to come closer to, superficially at least, creating a feeling of physical interaction, even though there is no physical interaction happening, right? But now it's going to take about a decade or two to get there. We are not there yet. We are now thinking about what is it that we need to do in a world which is not going to be COVID-free for a long time.
Absolutely, that was incredible answer. That fantastic. Thank you so much. I'll come once again back to Professor Mitra. The new normal and the next normal. Of course, the entire pandemic have changed the way we are looking at education, as we have been discussing. Not just education as in the teaching and learning, but also in the assessment, also in the psychometric test, and entire ecosystem. Now let's assume that COVID goes away. Let's assume for a second. Are we going back to what we were in the month of March or February? Or are we still will be embracing the innovations and new normal strategies which we learned in the last 9 months? So what's the world will look like? what the new normal world will look like?
Well, you asked me to do the impossible. I mean, predict March. I mean, I can't even predict, 25th of December by now. So, but yes, I can approach that problem from another point of view that might maybe it'll help. Why don't we look at something where teaching and learning happens in an entirely different way? Not a question of COVID or normal or not, but something where it just doesn't work the way it works for the rest of us. And I'll tell you where. Suppose for a moment that you are a young man or woman and you want to learn how to write an app, how to make an app for a phone. Well, where will you start? Will you go to a bookshop? That's useless. Any book on writing an app is obsolete by the time it gets off the press. The subject changes so fast. So what will you do? Will you go to the university? Well, you'll have professors of computer science who will teach you very complicated mathematics, but let me guarantee none of them know how to write an app. So they won't help you either. So then you go to the local private little school, say, can you teach me how to write an app? Well, they'll take your money, but they won't actually teach you how to write an app. You know why? Because a person who can write an app is not going to become a teacher. He's going to be an app maker. So you don't get teachers, you don't get books, you don't get professors, you don't get courses. So how do you learn how to write an app? Well, there's only one way. Get on the internet. Go to Google and say, teach me how to write an app. Google will take you to a video here, a video there. Finally, somebody will say, well, write these 5 lines of code and see if it works on your phone. You try that. And then you suddenly realize that there is a huge network of people like yourself on the internet. Thousands and thousands of them. They're all learning how to write an app. And they're talking to each other. So when you say, I tried this and it didn't work, back comes an answer maybe from Guatemala or something like that. Yes, I had that problem last week. Here is what you have to do to get rid of it. They don't know any theory. They just know how to make it work. I guarantee you, within 2 weeks, you will write your first app and it will be working just fine. You won't know anything about the theory behind it. You will just be a street smart app writer.
Excellent. Quickly, since we're running out of time, quickly I come to Professor Khosla on this. So, so all these huge universities are in the best of the locations, whether in US or Europe, which I mean, thousands of billions of dollars been invested in terms of building infrastructure and everything else. So will this entire physicalness or the physical infrastructure, if you can say, become to some extent redundant?
So let me answer that in a second. But before I answer that, I want to get back to Professor Mitra. I think we've been confusing the use of the word street smart. The way you described an app developer is exactly what people think in terms of learning by doing, where you don't need to know the basics, you don't need to know anything, you just start running the experiment, and over time, and in this case, you're using the internet, which is great, you learn, and out comes the answer. Street smart, Professor Mitra, to me means something else. Street smart in what they call chalu. It means somebody who understands how to read body language, somebody who understands cultural context, somebody who can keep a conversation going, somebody who can keep the momentum going. That's very different. So I think what you're talking about, street smart for learning, is very different than street smart the way I know it. I just wanted to clarify that because there's many people listening to this. Okay, so physicality of the next of the world. I think I I think unless somebody is able to convince me that the human need for physical touch is an artificial mechanism created only because that was the only way for humans to interact with each other starting with their birth. So it's not a biological need. So if you can tell me it's not a biological need, then I can imagine a completely virtual world where we don't have to see each other and never touch each other and feel each other. I'm not sure that I believe that to be true. I think there's something about touch which is a biological need, it's an emotional need, it's a psychological need. So I think we will have a world where there would be physicality in the world, but not to the same extent. So instead of you or my people having an office, one per person, I might have four per office. So what is called the hoteling concept. So I would be able to scale because of Zoom and because of internet technologies, but I will not be able to get rid of physicality, at least not in my lifetime. And this is at least my impression right now, but I could be wrong. We'll see.
Professor Mitra, can we quickly come to you for this, the relevance of the physical infrastructures? What do you think would be their importance and relevance anymore?
Well, there are lots of unanswered questions. I mean, firstly, what happens to laboratories? You can do all kinds of things over Zoom. You can teach this, you can teach that, and whether it works or it doesn't work, whatever. How do you do a chemistry experiment? How do you do an experiment at the undergraduate or the postgraduate level? What's going to be the replacement? How do you build things? Schools have things called maker labs. In India, they're called Atal labs, where children come and they can construct stuff. What's the equivalent of that in a cyber world where you can't physically actually go? So the infrastructure at the moment cannot be replaced 100%. The learners will lose out if the infrastructure just disappears. And of course it won't disappear. But the thing is, it needs to change. Okay? So when the COVID pandemic comes down to an acceptable level, when students start going back into campus, I think the focus should be on those things that you cannot do online. The emphasis, the funding should go into that, because that's our learning. And for the stuff that worked, ask the teachers, what worked online? Well, continue doing that online. What on earth for would you bring something that works online back into the old framework? So I think for educational administrators, it will be an interesting time where they reallocate their resources and their priorities.
Excellent. I'll go to Raki, who had been keeping the questions from the audience. Raki, are you with us?
Yes, sir. Unfortunately, sir, we are running out of time. We've run out of time.
Okay.
So
If you want, we can take maybe one question for both the gentlemen to react. Okay. So Raki feels that we are running out of time and we have to keep in time. So that brings us to the yes, Raki, are you telling something? Sorry. So that brings us to this end of this very interesting discussion. And on behalf of the INFOCOM 2020 ABP and entire organizing team, thanks for giving the opportunity to all of us to be part of this very interesting and very relevant discussion for discover the new frontiers of education in the next normal. And may I, on behalf of the INFOCOM 2020 and ABP, thank Professor Mitra and Professor Khosla for being with us. It has been absolutely fantastic to have both of you with us, and thank you very much for being with us, and look forward to have more association in the INFOCOM 2021, and possibly, as Professor Mitra said, maybe not on Zoom, but maybe physically if the world changes for a better. So thanks very much, and thanks for the audience for being with us. And That brings the end of this particular session. Thank you very much, both the gentlemen. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank
Namaskar.
you. Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Thank you.
sirs, for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Suborno Bose, sir, Dr. Pradeep K. Khosla, sir, and Dr. Sugata Mitra, sir. Thank you so much for joining us for this session today. It was, I think, really the spotlight session for today.